My name is Eleanor Hayes, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew everything about my only son Jeffrey. After losing my husband to cancer 12 years ago, Jeffrey became my world. That's why when I overheard him at my birthday party, drunk and laughing with his friends, my entire reality shattered. She still thinks I'm her real son, and I've been draining her for years. He slurred while they roared with laughter. Before I tell you how my world crumbled that night, let me know where you're watching from. Go ahead and subscribe if you want to hear how I uncovered the terrible truth and rebuilt my life from the ashes. I spent 35 wonderful years as an elementary school teacher in Portland, Oregon. Teaching third grade was my passion. Watching those little minds blossom gave me purpose. My husband Frank and I saved carefully, built our modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, and raised our son Jeffrey in what I believed was a loving, stable environment. Frank's battle with pancreatic cancer was swift and brutal. Within 6 months of diagnosis, I became a widow at 55. Jeffrey was 23 then, just finishing college with a business degree that Frank and I had proudly paid for by withdrawing from our retirement savings. We believed in education above all else. "Mom, I'll take care of you now," Jeffrey had promised at Frank's funeral, holding my trembling hand. I remembered how much he looked like his father that day. Tall with sandy brown hair and those distinctive Hayes family eyes, a unique hazel with flecks of gold around the pupils. After Frank's death, I threw myself into volunteering at the local library and community garden. My teacher's pension and Frank's life insurance allowed me to live comfortably, if not extravagantly. I enjoyed my garden, my book club, and weekend visits from Jeffrey, who had moved to Seattle for a job opportunity after graduation. 3 years after Frank's passing, Jeffrey called with exciting news. "Mom, I've found my calling in real estate investment, but I need some startup capital." I didn't hesitate to loan him $30,000 from Frank's life insurance money. 6 months later, he needed another $20,000 for what he called an opportunity too good to pass up. The pattern continued over the years, Jeffrey's business ventures always needing just a little more capital, just one more loan. Sometimes he'd repay small amounts, enough to maintain my trust. "You'll get it all back with interest, Mom," he'd promise. "I'm building something big here." I wanted to believe him, and truthfully I enjoyed feeling needed. Jeffrey would call weekly, visit monthly, and never missed a holiday or birthday. He helped when I had minor surgery for gallstones 5 years ago, and again when I developed a mild heart arrhythmia 2 years back. The doctor had prescribed medication and suggested reducing stress, saying my condition wasn't severe but needed monitoring. My best friend Margaret Thompson, whom I'd known since our first teaching job together 40 years ago, occasionally expressed concern. "Ellie, don't you think Jeffrey asks for money rather often?" she'd ask gently during our weekly coffee dates. "He's building his business," I'd defend him. "Besides, what else would I spend it on? I have everything I need, and it makes me happy to help my son succeed." Last April, as my 67th birthday approached, Jeffrey insisted on hosting a party at my house. "You deserve to be celebrated, Mom," he said, promising to handle everything. "I've invited a few of my investment partners too. They're dying to meet the amazing woman I always talk about." The day of the party arrived with beautiful spring weather. Jeffrey had arranged catering, decorations, and even hired a local pianist I'd always admired to play during dinner. He introduced me to his friends, Robert, a tall man with a perpetual smirk, Thomas, heavyset with a booming laugh, and Kyle, younger than the others with designer clothes and a flashy watch. "Mrs. Hayes, Jeffrey tells us you were quite the investor yourself," Thomas commented during appetizers. I laughed. "Hardly. Frank and I were savers, not investors. Teaching doesn't exactly make you wealthy, but comfortable enough to help the next generation get ahead," Robert added with a knowing glance at Jeffrey that I didn't understand at the time. Margaret arrived with her husband Paul, bringing my favorite lemon cake from the bakery downtown. My neighbor Diane came, along with several friends from my book club. Jeffrey kept my wine glass filled, though I rarely drink more than a single glass. The atmosphere was festive, and for the first time in years, my house felt full of life again. "Jeffrey's really gone all out," Margaret whispered as we admired the elaborate flower arrangements. "These must have cost a fortune." "He's doing well in his investments," I said proudly. He wanted to spoil me. As dinner concluded and the pianist played my favorite Chopin piece, I excused myself to the kitchen for a moment of quiet and to fetch my heart medication. That's when I heard male voices drifting in from the backyard patio through the partially open window. Jeffrey's voice, slurred from too many drinks, carried clearly through the evening air. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Truly, I just needed a moment away from the noise to take my medication. But Jeffrey's voice, louder than usual from the alcohol, caught my attention as I reached for the pill bottle in the kitchen cabinet. She still thinks I'm her real son, and I've been draining her for years, Jeffrey slurred, followed by raucous laughter from his friends. My hand froze midair.
Sureli ide mishart.
I moved closer to the window, pill bottle clutched tightly in my suddenly trembling fingers. The look on her face when I told her about that fake investment opportunity in Phoenix, Jeffrey continued. So trusting. That funded my Cancun trip last spring. Dude, you're cold. One of his friends, Thomas, I think, responded. She seems like a nice lady. Nice and loaded, Jeffrey replied. The life insurance, her pension, the house equity. I've been working it slowly. Another year, I'll convince her to add me to her accounts for convenience, and then it's game over. What if she catches on? Another voice asked. She won't. Old people see what they want to see. I've been Jeffrey Hayes for 7 years now. 7 years. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Still can't believe you pulled this off, Robert's voice said. Meeting the real Jeffrey in rehab, then just stepping into his life after he OD'd. Best decision I ever made, fake Jeffrey, whoever he was, boasted. His mom hadn't seen him in years because they were estranged. He showed me pictures, told me stories. After he died, I just reached out to dear old mom, fed her some sob story about getting clean, and she welcomed me with open arms and an open checkbook. The room began to spin around me. My chest tightened painfully, my heart condition flaring with the shock. The pill bottle slipped from my grasp, tablets scattering across the tile floor. I couldn't breathe. This stranger, this impostor, had been pretending to be my son for 7 years? My Jeffrey had died alone in some rehabilitation facility, and I never knew? You even look kind of like him, one of the men commented. That's the beauty of it. Same general build, hair color. I studied his mannerisms from videos on his phone. Eleanor sees what she expects to see. Her little boy all grown up. What about his ID and stuff? He had all that with him in rehab. I just replaced the photos on his social media with mine over time. The old lady doesn't even use Facebook except to look at my profile occasionally. Man, that's some long con commitment. Worth every minute. I've cleared almost $300,000 from her over the years, and the big payday is coming. She's got some heart condition now, doctor visits I conveniently take her to. Another few months I'll have power of attorney. After that, more laughter. I couldn't hear the rest over the roaring in my ears. My chest squeezed tighter, each breath a struggle. The kitchen tiles rose to meet me as my knees finally buckled. The fall knocked a serving platter from the counter, sending it crashing to the floor. Eleanor. Margaret's concerned voice called from the dining room. Are you all right? I couldn't answer. Couldn't move. The revelation had paralyzed me completely. The man I'd welcomed into my home, supported financially, and loved as my only child was a complete stranger. A predator who had been systematically stealing from me while waiting for me to die. And my real Jeffrey, my actual son, was dead. Had been dead for years while I unknowingly embraced his impersonator. Eleanor. Margaret gasped, rushing to my side. Paul. Come quick. Margaret helped me to a sitting position, her face swimming before my tear-filled eyes. My heart, I managed to whisper, though the pain was far deeper than the physical discomfort in my chest. Paul appeared, then others from the party. Among them the impostor, the stranger wearing my son's identity, knelt beside me with practiced concern. Mom, what happened? Did you fall? Fake concern from a fake son. His touch on my arm made my skin crawl now. Eye migraine, I lied, unable to look at him. Too much excitement. Too much wine. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not when I was reeling from shock, surrounded by partygoers, and physically compromised. I needed time to think, to process this horrifying reality. Let's get you to bed, the impostor said, helping me up with Paul's assistance. I'm so sorry, everyone. Mom's not been feeling well lately. The casual way he said Mom made bow rise in my throat. Each step down the hallway to my bedroom felt like walking through quicksand. Margaret followed close behind, her brow furrowed with worry. Should we call an ambulance? She asked. No, I said quickly. Just need to rest. Please. Once in my bedroom, I insisted they leave me alone. Just need darkness and quiet for the migraine, I explained. I'll check on you soon, the impostor promised, closing my door. Alone at last, I curled into a ball on my bed, still fully dressed, and pressed my face into the pillow to muffle my sobs. My real son was dead. Had been dead while I proudly showed this stranger Jeffrey's childhood photos. While I told him family stories. While I wrote him checks from the college fund his father and I had sacrificed to build. The party continued without me, the piano music and laughter a grotesque soundtrack to my private horror. I heard the impostor explaining my absence, accepting birthday wishes on my behalf, playing the role of concerned son to perfection. Hours later, after the guests had gone and the house fell silent, I lay awake in the darkness, my mind racing through 7 years of memories, re-examining every interaction, every conversation with new, horrified understanding. Dawn broke before my tears finally subsided, replaced by something else entirely, determination. I would discover exactly who this man was, what had really happened to my Jeffrey, and I would make this impostor pay for every lie he'd told. Morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains as I heard movement in the kitchen. For a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, everything was normal. Then the crushing weight of last night's revelation came flooding back. The man preparing breakfast in my kitchen wasn't Jeffrey. My real son was dead, and I'd been living with his impersonator. I forced myself to take several deep breaths, recalling Dr. Wilson's advice about managing stress for my heart condition. I needed to be strategic now. If I confronted this impostor immediately, I might learn nothing. Worse, if he realized I knew the truth, there was no telling what he might do. I splashed cold water on my face in my ensuite bathroom, noting my swollen eyes and pale complexion in the mirror. I needed to act normal until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Mom? You up? His voice called from the hallway. Not my son's voice. A stranger's voice that I'd mistaken for family. Yes, I managed to reply. Just a minute. I took another steadying breath and opened the door. How's the head? He asked, looking appropriately concerned. You had quite a spell last night. Better, I lied. Still fragile. Thank you for handling everything. That's what sons are for. He smiled, and I had to suppress a shudder. I made your favorite blueberry pancakes. We ate breakfast together at the kitchen table, just like we had countless times before. Only now I noticed things. The way he held his fork, pinched between his fingers rather than the way my real Jeffrey had held utensils. The unfamiliar cadence of his speech. How had I not seen these inconsistencies before? I'll clean up, he offered after breakfast. Why don't you rest? I'll head back to Seattle this afternoon unless you need me to stay longer. No, I said quickly. I'll be fine. You've got work tomorrow. As he showered, I seized the opportunity. My hands shook as I slipped into his guest room and spotted his wallet on the nightstand. Inside, I found a driver's license in Jeffrey's name, my son's name, but with the impostor's photo. There was also a credit card I didn't recognize, and tucked behind it, another ID with the name, Daniel Thornton. Daniel Thornton. The impostor had a name now. I heard the shower stop and quickly replaced the wallet exactly as I'd found it. Back in my room, I opened my laptop with trembling fingers and searched for Daniel Thornton criminal record. Multiple results appeared, including a 3-year-old news article about a Daniel Thornton charged with fraud in Arizona. The mugshot confirmed it, a younger version of the man currently using my towels. Next, I searched for Jeffrey Hayes obituary, Portland, Oregon. Nothing specific appeared. I tried variations. Jeffrey Hayes death, Jeffrey Hayes overdose, but found no clear confirmation. How could I verify what happened to my real son? I called Margaret after the impostor left, keeping my voice low despite being alone in the house. "Ellie, how are you feeling today?" she asked. "Margaret, I need your help, but you can't tell anyone. Not even Paul." My voice broke. "Something terrible has happened. We arranged to meet at her house." I told her everything, the conversation I'd overheard, my morning discoveries. "My God, Ellie," Margaret whispered, her face pale. "We need to call the police right now." "And tell them what? That I overheard a drunk conversation? I have no proof my real Jeffrey is dead. No proof this man isn't who he claims to be. But the ID you found, which I accessed by searching his personal belongings without permission. I need more evidence." Margaret reluctantly agreed to help me investigate discreetly. "First step," she said, "is confirming whether your real Jeffrey is actually deceased." I made an appointment with Dr. Wilson, my cardiologist, the following day. After discussing my heart condition, I hesitantly brought up my concerns. "Doctor, this may sound strange, but has Jeffrey ever mentioned any childhood medical conditions to you?" Dr. Wilson looked puzzled. "He mentioned Jeffrey had severe penicillin allergies when filling out your family history." I felt my blood run cold. My son never had any drug allergies. Not one. Dr. Wilson's expression grew concerned. "Mrs. Hayes, is everything all right?" I couldn't bring myself to explain the full situation, but I asked him to note that Jeffrey should not be given any medical information about me without my explicit consent. My next stop was Jeffrey's supposed alma mater. I called their alumni office, claiming to be verifying graduation dates for a reunion. "I'm sorry, but we have no record of a Jeffrey Hayes graduating in 2010, the clerk informed me. Back home, I began a careful inventory of my financial records. The impostor had been clever, never taking enough at once to raise immediate alarms. $5,000 for a property investment opportunity, $8,000 for business certification courses, $12,000 for a time-sensitive development project, small withdrawals from my retirement accounts, loans that were partially repaid, then borrowed again in larger amounts. Over 7 years, the total approached the $300,000 he'd boasted about to his friends. Money that Frank and I had saved over decades of careful budgeting. Money meant for our golden years. In my attic, I found photo albums from before Jeffrey's college years. Studying them closely, I could now see subtle differences between my real son and the impostor. The shape of the ears, the set of the jaw, details I'd attributed to normal aging and weight fluctuations. My real Jeffrey had a small scar on his left wrist from a childhood fall. The impostor had no such mark. My real Jeffrey had a birthmark on his shoulder. I realized with horror that I hadn't seen the impostor without a shirt in 7 years. He always maintained a peculiar modesty I'd attributed to maturity. As my investigation deepened, so did my heartache. Photos of family vacations, Jeffrey's high school graduation, fishing trips with Frank. The impostor had stolen more than money. He'd stolen these precious memories, inserting himself into my family history like a malignant growth. My chest pains returned with increasing frequency as the stress mounted. But beneath the pain and grief, another emotion was taking root. Anger. Cold, clarifying anger that pushed away the fog of shock and grief. This man, this Daniel Thornton, had exploited my loss. Had let me believe my son was alive while Jeffrey lay in an unmarked grave somewhere. Had systematically drained my resources while planning to take everything. It was time to dig deeper. The storage unit facility manager recognized me immediately when I arrived. "Mrs. Hayes, haven't seen you in ages. Jeffrey usually handles the payments." Another revelation. I hadn't even known we had a storage unit. The manager's casual comment revealed yet another strand in the impostor's web of deception. "Yes, Jeffrey's been so helpful," I replied with a forced smile. "But I need to find some old family photos he stored for me." "Unit 217, the manager said, handing me a key. "Sign here, please." The storage unit contained boxes I'd never seen before, labeled in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened one marked family photos, and found albums I thought were safely in my attic. The impostor had been systematically removing pieces of my life, my history. In one box, I discovered a folder labeled Samuel, my real Jeffrey's middle name, one he'd rarely used. Inside were report cards, certificates, and letters I'd never seen before. Letters addressed to Mom that I'd never received. Letters detailing rehab attempts, apologies, and eventually sobriety achievements. Letters my real son had written that never reached me. My hands trembled as I read my son's actual words for the first time in over a decade. Mom, 6 months sober today. The program says I should make amends, but I'm not ready to face you after everything. Maybe someday. I hope you're well. Love, Sam. Dated 8 years ago. A year before the impostor entered my life. I found another letter. Mom, 1 year sober now. I met someone here who reminds me of Dad in some ways. Name's Daniel. He listens when I talk about you and home. Sometimes I show him the old photos I kept. It helps to remember the good times. Love, Sam. Daniel. My chest tightened. Daniel Thornton had met my son in rehab, gained his trust, heard our family stories. The final letter was dated 7 years ago. Mom, I think I'm finally ready to come home. To apologize in person. Daniel says I should just call, but I want to do this right. I need to see your face when I tell you I'm sorry for everything. 2 weeks until I complete the program. Then I'm coming home. Love always, your son Jeffrey Samuel Hayes. He never came home. Because he never left that facility alive. The impostor, Daniel, had taken his place instead. With shaking hands, I gathered the letters and several photos of the real Jeffrey as an adult that I'd never seen before. Evidence. My next stop was to visit Brian Walsh, Jeffrey's childhood best friend who had drifted away during college. I found his dental practice across town and waited patiently until his last appointment. Mrs. Hayes. Brian looked surprised but pleased to see me in his office doorway. This is unexpected. Brian, I need to ask you something important, I said, keeping my voice steady. When was the last time you saw Jeffrey? My Jeffrey. His expression shifted subtly. It's been years, Mrs. Hayes. Not since before he dropped out of college. Dropped out. Another piece of information the impostor had concealed. Brian, please. I need to know the truth. Brian hesitated, then gestured to a chair. I ran into him about 8 years ago at a recovery meeting. I was there supporting my cousin. Jeffrey was. He was trying to get clean. We talked briefly. He seemed ashamed to see me there. Did you see him again after that? Brian's eyes grew sad. Just once at the funeral. It was small, just a few people from his recovery group. I tried to find your contact information, but Jeffrey had said you two were estranged. I should have tried harder to reach you. I'm so sorry. My son had died and I hadn't known. Hadn't been there to hold his hand to say goodbye. Tears streamed down my face. Mrs. Hayes, what's going on? Brian asked gently. I showed him a recent photo of Jeffrey, the impostor. Brian's eyes widened. That's not Jeffrey. Who is that? With Brian's confirmation, I had what I needed. My real son was gone. His death deliberately concealed from me by the man who stole his identity. I visited a private investigator next, Howard Jennings, recommended by a former teacher colleague whose daughter had gone through a difficult divorce. Mrs. Hayes, Howard said after hearing my story, what you're describing is unfortunately not uncommon. Elder fraud is a growing problem. But this identity theft aspect adds another dimension. Howard ran a background check on Daniel Thornton, revealing a history of fraud convictions in Arizona and Nevada. All relatively minor charges that had resulted in probation rather than significant jail time. The pattern was consistent. Daniel targeted vulnerable individuals, gained their trust, and systematically exploited them financially. Has he shown any violent tendencies? Howard asked. No, I admitted. He's always been gentle. Nevertheless, we should proceed with caution. If he realizes you know the truth, his behavior could change dramatically. Howard recommended gathering more evidence before contacting authorities. Install cameras in your home, he suggested. Record any conversations about finances. Secure your valuable documents and change your banking passwords immediately. That evening, Margaret came over with dinner, finding me surrounded by bank statements and letters. Ellie, she said gently, setting down the casserole dish, this is too much for you to handle alone. We need to call the police. Not yet, I insisted. If we move too soon, he might disappear. I need to know everything: what happened to Jeffrey, where my money went, how long he's been planning this. And then what? Margaret demanded. What's your endgame here? I looked up at my oldest friend, feeling a cold resolve settling over me. Justice. For my son and for myself. Margaret held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But promise me you'll be careful. This man is dangerous, Ellie. I know exactly what he is, I replied. And soon, he'll know exactly who I am. The tiny cameras Howard helped me install throughout my home revealed truths more painful than I'd imagined. Over the next week, I watched through a secure online portal as Daniel, the man I believed was my son, systematically violated my privacy and trust in ways I hadn't detected before. When he thought I was napping, he searched through my desk drawers, photographing my financial documents with his phone. He added software to my computer that recorded my keystrokes, capturing passwords and account information. He answered my phone when I was in the shower, telling my friends I wasn't feeling well enough for visitors. Most disturbing was his methodical gaslighting. I watched recordings of him moving my belongings, hiding my reading glasses, relocating my medication, changing settings on my thermostat. Small disorienting actions designed to make me question my memory and independence. Classic isolation tactics, Howard explained when I showed him the footage. He's creating a controlled environment where you depend on him and doubt yourself. The medications were particularly concerning. Camera footage showed Daniel counting my heart pills, pocketing several, then returning the bottle with fewer tablets. A quick internet search revealed my prescription had street value. He was stealing my medication to sell. Daniel called regularly from Seattle, his concern seemingly genuine. How are you feeling, Mom? Taking your medication? Any more dizzy spells? Each conversation now revealed his true intent. Assessing my vulnerability, planting seeds of dependence, gathering information to exploit. I'm thinking about updating my will, I mentioned during one call, baiting him. With these heart problems, I should get everything in order. That's smart planning, he replied too quickly. I know a great attorney who specializes in estate planning. I could drive down this weekend, take you to meet him. That would be wonderful, honey, I said, the endearment tasting like ashes in my mouth. After consulting with Howard, I made an appointment with an actual attorney, Stephanie Rodriguez, who specialized in elder law and fraud cases. I brought my evidence: the camera footage, financial records, Jeffrey's letters, and the fake ID I'd photographed from Daniel's wallet. Mrs. Hayes, Stephanie said gravely after reviewing everything, this is one of the most comprehensive cases of elder fraud I've encountered. He's been extraordinarily methodical. Can we prove it legally? I asked. The financial exploitation, absolutely. The identity theft, yes. His responsibility for concealing your real son's death. She hesitated. That's more complicated, but we can certainly build a case. Stephanie explained that Daniel had already forged my signature on several documents, including a durable power of attorney form that hadn't been properly notarized. He'd attempted to add himself to my house deed as well, but the paperwork had been flagged for verification. The most disturbing aspect, Stephanie continued, is this appears to be part of a pattern. I've contacted colleagues in Arizona and Nevada where he has prior convictions. There are similarities to other cases. Always vulnerable individuals, often with health issues, always involving identity manipulation. He's done this before, I whispered. To other families. Yes. And he's become more sophisticated each time. Detective Carmen Martinez from the Elder Fraud Unit met me at Stephanie's office the following day. She reviewed my evidence with professional detachment that occasionally broke when reviewing particularly egregious examples. Mrs. Hayes, I believe Daniel Thornton may be connected to a larger fraud ring we've been investigating, Detective Martinez explained. These operations typically target elderly individuals with assets but limited family connections. The methods you've documented, the gaslighting, medication theft, document forgery, match their playbook exactly. Will you arrest him? I asked. We need to catch him in the act, Detective Martinez explained. Right now, he could claim he made mistakes with your finances or that you gave him permission. We need irrefutable evidence of criminal intent. The detective suggested a sting operation, creating a situation where Daniel would reveal his true intentions beyond any doubt. It would require my participation, my willingness to face the man who had caused me such pain. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said firmly. That evening, Margaret and Dr. Wilson came to my home for what felt like an intervention. "Ellie, this is too dangerous," Margaret insisted. "This man has been deceiving you for years. Who knows what he might do if cornered?" Dr. Wilson agreed. "The stress alone could seriously impact your heart condition. I'm concerned about your health through all this." "And I'm concerned about justice," I replied. "For my real son who died alone. For myself, for the other victims. I taught third grade for 35 years. I taught children to stand up to bullies, to tell the truth, to do what's right even when it's hard. What kind of example would I be if I walked away now?" My determination eventually won them over. Dr. Wilson prescribed additional medication to help manage my stress and insisted on daily check-ins. Margaret agreed to be nearby during the sting operation. As I prepared for Daniel's upcoming visit, I found myself reflecting on my years as a teacher. I had always been able to spot children who weren't being truthful, who were hiding something behind their practiced smiles. How had I missed the deception living in my own home? The fraud sleeping in my real son's bedroom? Perhaps grief had blinded me. The desperate wish to believe Jeffrey had returned, healthy and successful, had overridden my natural skepticism. I had seen what I wanted to see, my little boy come home. But I wasn't blind anymore. And Daniel Thornton was about to learn that underestimating a determined mother, a determined teacher, was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. Daniel arrived Friday evening with an overnight bag and a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers. Another detail gleaned from my real son's memories, weaponized to maintain his deception. "You look tired, Mom," he observed, setting down his bag in the entryway. "Have you been taking your medication?" "Oh, you know how it is." I sighed, deliberately slurring my words slightly. "I get confused about which pills to take when." His eyes sharpened with interest, exactly the reaction Detective Martinez had predicted. Perceived vulnerability would accelerate his timeline. "Why don't I organize your medications for you?" he offered. "Set up one of those weekly pill containers? Would you? That would be so helpful." I shuffled slightly as I moved to the kitchen, adding a slight tremor to my hands as I prepared tea. Over dinner, I carefully laid the groundwork for our sting operation, mentioning details that Howard and Detective Martinez had helped me prepare. "I've been thinking about the future," I began hesitantly, "with my heart the way it is." "Don't talk like that," Daniel interrupted with practiced concern. "You're going to be fine." "We need to be realistic," I continued. "I met with my financial advisor last week. Did I tell you that?" Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "No, you didn't mention it. Any particular reason?" "Just getting my affairs in order." He reminded me about my safety deposit box at First National. "I should probably show you what's in there. Family jewelry, some cash, important documents." The predatory interest in his eyes was poorly concealed. "I could take you there next week," he offered too quickly. "I'd appreciate that," I said, then deliberately changed the subject to appear scattered. "Oh, did I tell you Margaret's daughter is expecting twins?" Throughout the evening, I played the role of an increasingly confused elderly woman. Forgetting names, losing my train of thought, appearing physically frilier than I actually was. Daniel responded by becoming more solicitous, more helpful, and more controlling. "You should let me handle the bills," he suggested as I pretended to squint at my checkbook. "It would be easier for both of us." "Maybe you're right," I agreed. "Everything seems so complicated these days." Before bed, I made a show of struggling with my medication, accidentally dropping pills and appearing confused about dosages. Daniel quickly took over, counting out pills with an expertise that would have alarmed me had I not been expecting it. "I'm worried about you, Mom," he said, his concern sounding genuine even to my ears. This was what made him dangerous, his ability to believe his own performance. "Maybe I should stay a few more days, make sure you're okay." "That would be wonderful," I replied. "I feel safer when you're here." The next morning, I enacted the next phase of our plan. Over breakfast, I clutched my chest suddenly, gasping for breath. "Mom!" Daniel was instantly alert, moving to my side. What's wrong? My chest, I whispered. Can't breathe properly. Should I call an ambulance? I shook my head.
No, no.
It's happened before. Just need my medication. The emergency one. In my bedroom, top drawer. As Daniel rushed to retrieve the medication, I quickly texted Detective Martinez. Phase 1 initiated. Daniel returned with the nitroglycerin tablets Dr. Wilson had prescribed specifically for this purpose. Medication that would temporarily lower my blood pressure, but cause no lasting harm. Here, under your tongue, Daniel instructed, his medical knowledge another red flag I'd previously ignored. I let the tablet dissolve, then gradually showed signs of improvement. Thank you, I breathed. That was frightening. You need to see a doctor, Daniel insisted. Today. It's Saturday, I protested weakly. I know someone, he said, already reaching for his phone. A cardiac specialist who does concierge services. House calls. Within an hour, a well-dressed man with a medical bag arrived at my home. I recognized him immediately from the photos Detective Martinez had shown me. Thomas Alvarez, a former medical assistant with a suspended license who frequently collaborated with fraud rings by posing as a physician. Dr. Garcia, Daniel greeted him at the door. Thank you for coming so quickly. The fake doctor examined me with enough medical knowledge to be convincing, taking my blood pressure and listening to my heart with a stethoscope. Mrs. Hayes, I'm concerned about these episodes, he announced gravely. I'd like to adjust your medication and run some additional tests. Is it serious? Daniel asked, his expression concerned while his eyes remained calculated. Potentially, the fake doctor replied. At her age, with this cardiac history, we need to be proactive. I'd recommend updating her legal documents as well, medical power of attorney, financial arrangements. Just to be prepared. I have the forms in my office, the impostor physician continued smoothly. I could bring them by tomorrow. Many of my elderly patients find it reassuring to have everything in order. That would be very helpful, Daniel said before I could respond. Mom's been worried about exactly these things. After the doctor left, Daniel was immediately on his phone, stepping onto the back porch for privacy. Through my security app, I watched him make multiple calls to his co-conspirators, to a banker I didn't recognize, to a real estate agent. Moving timeline up, he said in one call. Medical situation developing. POA by Monday, house listed within 30 days. That evening, Daniel prepared dinner, serving me a glass of wine despite my medication. I pretended to sip it while discreetly emptying it into a potted plant when he wasn't looking. His solicitousness increased as he believed I was becoming more impaired. Mom, I've been thinking, he began as we sat in the living room after dinner. With your health concerns, maybe you should consider moving somewhere smaller. Less maintenance, more support. Leave my home. I put just the right amount of distress in my voice. It's a lot of house for one person, he continued smoothly, and the equity could be invested to generate income for your care. I suppose you're right, I conceded. But all the paperwork, the decisions, it overwhelms me. That's why you have me, Daniel smiled, reaching for my hand. I'll handle everything. Everything. I questioned, my voice deliberately faint. Everything, he confirmed. In fact, when Dr. Garcia comes tomorrow, we should discuss giving me medical power of attorney. Just temporarily, while you're recovering. And financial decisions too? I asked. Absolutely. I'll protect your interests like they're my own. The irony of his statement was almost too much to bear. You're such a good son, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. Just like your father. A flicker of unease crossed his face at the mention of Frank, a man he'd never met but had claimed to remember. Get some rest, Mom. Tomorrow we'll get everything sorted out. That night I barely slept, knowing what the morning would bring. Everything was in place for the final act of our operation. Detective Martinez and her team were prepared. Howard had all cameras functioning at optimal capacity. Stephanie had prepared the legal documentation we needed. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I removed Jeffrey's, my real son's, photograph from my nightstand drawer. His genuine smile, his eyes so like his father's, gazed back at me. Tomorrow, I whispered to the image of my lost child. Tomorrow will set things right. The morning of the sting operation dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in my most comfortable clothes, took my actual heart medication, and prepared a simple breakfast while waiting for Daniel to wake up. He appeared in the kitchen looking well-rested and focused. "Morning, Mom. How are you feeling today?" "Better," I replied. "Sleep always helps." "Good. Because we have an important day ahead. Dr. Garcia will be here at 10, and I've scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor at 2. I nodded meekly. "Whatever you think is best, dear." The fake doctor arrived precisely at 10, bringing with him a briefcase full of documents. Detective Martinez and her team were already in position, some in a surveillance van outside, others posing as gardeners working on a neighbor's property. "Mrs. Hayes, how are you feeling today?" The impostor physician asked as Daniel ushered him into our living room. "Confused," I admitted truthfully. "Everything seems to be happening so quickly." "That's natural at your age," he replied condescendingly. "That's why these documents are so important. They ensure your son can make decisions when you're unable to." He spread papers across my coffee table, medical power of attorney forms, financial authorization documents, property transfer paperwork, each designed to give Daniel complete control over every aspect of my life. "I just need your signature on these forms," he explained, offering me a pen. "Your son will handle everything else." Daniel watched intently as I picked up the pen with a trembling hand. This was the moment we'd been waiting for, irrefutable evidence of criminal intent. "Before I sign," I said slowly, "I'd like to clarify something." I turned to Daniel, meeting his eyes directly. "These give you full control over my medical decisions and finances, correct?" "Yes, but only to protect you," he assured me smoothly. "The same way you protected my real son, Jeffrey?" The room went utterly still. Daniel's expression froze, then quickly recovered. "Mom, you're confused again. I am Jeffrey." I straightened in my chair, my voice suddenly firm and clear. "No, Daniel Thornton. You are not." The fake doctor glanced between us nervously. "Mrs. Hayes, perhaps you need to rest." "I know everything," I continued, my gaze locked on Daniel's increasingly alarmed face. "I know you met my son in rehab. I know he died 7 years ago. I know you stole his identity and have been systematically draining my finances ever since." "Mom, this is crazy talk," Daniel attempted, his voice strained. "You're having some kind of episode." "I found the letters," I cut him off. "My real son's letters. I visited his childhood friend Brian. I know about your criminal record in Arizona and Nevada." Daniel's face transformed, the caring facade dropping away completely. He stood abruptly. "You have no proof of anything." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I have extensive proof, including recordings of you discussing your plans to sell my house and empty my accounts." Daniel lunged for his jacket hanging by the door, but it was too late. Detective Martinez and 2 officers entered through the front door, while additional officers appeared at the back entrance. "Daniel Thornton," Detective Martinez announced, "you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and practicing medicine without a license." She nodded toward the fake doctor who was attempting to gather the incriminating paperwork. "Him too," she instructed her officers. "Thomas Alvarez, same charges plus violation of probation." The shock on Daniel's face as he was handcuffed was something I'll never forget. The utter disbelief that I, the confused old woman he'd been manipulating for years, had orchestrated his downfall. "You don't understand," he sputtered as officers led him toward the door. "She's confused. She gave me permission." "Save it for your attorney," Detective Martinez interrupted, then turned to me. "Mrs. Hayes, you did wonderfully. We have everything we need." As they led Daniel away, he looked back at me one final time. Not with anger or hatred as I'd expected, but with something like respect. In that moment I realized he had genuinely underestimated me, had never seen me as a complete person with intelligence and agency, just a vulnerable mark to be exploited. The weeks following the arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, paperwork, and emotional processing. Daniel's arrest led to the identification of 6 other victims across 3 states, and the unraveling of a sophisticated elder fraud ring. Thomas Alvarez cooperated with authorities, providing evidence against the entire network in exchange for leniency. Daniel, however, maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. He claimed I had invited him into my life, had willingly given him money, had known all along he wasn't my biological son but had welcomed him anyway. The trial was difficult. Sitting in the courtroom, listening to the methodical presentation of evidence, recordings of Daniel's conversations, financial records showing the systematic theft, testimony from other victims with nearly identical stories, was both validating and deeply painful. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Daniel as I spoke about my real son, about the grief of learning he had died alone, about the violation of having his memory manipulated for financial gain. The defendant didn't just steal my money, I told the jury, my voice steady despite my racing heart. He stole 7 years I could have spent properly mourning my son. He stole my memories, my trust, and my sense of safety in my own home. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Daniel was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with additional charges pending in other states. But the legal proceedings were only part of my journey toward healing. Through the investigation, Detective Martinez had located records of my real son's death and burial. With Howard's help, I finally visited Jeffrey's grave. A simple marker in a public cemetery, paid for by his rehab facility when no family claimed his body. Standing before that modest stone, I finally had the chance to say goodbye properly, to apologize for the estrangement that had kept us apart in his final years, to tell him how proud I was that he had achieved sobriety before his death. Through Jeffrey's former counselor at the rehabilitation center, I was connected with Laura, a woman Jeffrey had been dating before his death. Laura had a 6-year-old son named Jacob, my grandson, a child I hadn't known existed. Our first meeting was awkward, tentative. Laura was understandably cautious after everything that had happened, but Jacob, with Jeffrey's eyes and frank smile, approached me without hesitation. "Are you really my grandma?" he asked directly. "Yes," I answered, tears filling my eyes. "I really am." Building a relationship with Laura and Jacob became my priority. We started with short visits, then longer ones. I learned that Jeffrey had spoken of me often during his recovery, had planned to reconcile, to introduce me to Laura and their son. He wanted to make things right, Laura told me over coffee during one visit. He was so proud of his sobriety, wanted to show you he'd changed. Those words were both healing and heartbreaking. My real son had wanted to come home, had been planning to return to me before his accidental overdose cut his life short. With Stephanie's help, I established a trust for Jacob's education and created a foundation to help elderly victims of fraud. The Eleanor Hayes Trust for Elder Protection now provides resources, education, and legal assistance to vulnerable seniors. I returned to teaching in a way, conducting workshops at senior centers about recognizing and avoiding fraud. My story, painful as it was to share, helped others identify potential scams and protect themselves. "You turned a tragedy into purpose," Margaret told me after one particularly emotional presentation. "Frank and Jeffrey would be so proud." 3 years have passed since Daniel's arrest. My heart condition has stabilized with proper medication and reduced stress. My relationship with Laura and Jacob has deepened into genuine family bonds. Jacob stays with me one weekend each month, filling my home with the laughter and energy it had lacked for so long. The financial wounds have mostly healed. While I couldn't recover everything Daniel stole, Stephanie's aggressive legal strategy secured significant restitution. More importantly, I've regained my sense of security and independence. Sometimes I still wake in the night, momentarily disoriented, wondering if it was all a terrible dream. Did I really live with a stranger for 7 years, believing he was my son? The thought remains incomprehensible at times. But then I remember something my third-grade students taught me long ago. Resilience isn't about avoiding falls, but about how you rise afterward. At 67, I experienced one of the cruelest deceptions imaginable. At 70, I've rebuilt my life with new purpose and unexpected joy. If there's wisdom in my story, perhaps it's this. Trust your instincts, verify what seems questionable, and remember that age doesn't diminish your worth or agency. And most importantly, it's never too late to begin again. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something wasn't quite right with someone close to you? What did you do about it? Share your stories in the comments below. If my experience helps even one person recognize and escape a potential fraud, then something positive has come from my pain. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming life's unexpected challenges, and please share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. Thank you for listening, and remember, wisdom comes not just from our victories, but from how we handle our deepest disappointments.